In this video, I'm getting paid to one wheel and drink coffee. Actually, it's cold. I'm going inside. Let's talk about the 22 degree Tamabe. So this beer is a stout version of the 13 degree Tamabe, and it just so happened that yesterday, December 9th, was the release of this beer. Now this is going to be a unique recipe video because I actually took some video on the day of the brew day, but as you'll see about halfway through, I hit a snag and decided to stop filming because I was starting to get frustrated. But I wanted to go ahead and share this recipe with you, so there will be a PDF listed on the website, tanglefootbrewing.com, if you want to go and download that for a 5-gallon homebrew batch. So let's dive into this. First of all, what is this beer? Well, it is a stout or bigger version of the 13 degree Tamabe. 22 in reference to the 22 degree Plato starting gravity of the beer, so it is a pretty high gravity brew. So the details for this recipe will be on the PDF on the website, but I'm going to go over the rough parameters of the recipe so that you can scale up or adjust to whatever your system is capable of making. So we've got a base grain of Pilsner malt sitting at about 80% of the total malt bill. Then we've got Caramunic Type 1, which is going to fill out that middle caramel note and some of that residual sweetness that's going to be in the beer at 10% of the total grain bill. And then we have the most important ingredient in this recipe, Carafa Special 2. This is the roasted malt that gives the beer all of its chocolatey coffee goodness as well as the super dark color. And that is also at about 10%. For hops, we're using none other than Czech, and we're going to shoot for a bitterness content of about 30 IBUs. So this beer is brewed pretty similarly to the other lagers, but there are a couple of unique nuances to this recipe because it is such a big beer. First, we mash in like normal and we're adding salts to adjust the pH. In this case, we're adding baking soda because the solution in the mash is going to be much more acidic from all that roasted malt. And we're going to set our strike temp to about 168 to 170 degrees, depending on the temperature in the brewery. And we're shooting for a mash temperature of around 153 to 154 degrees. This beer has plenty of unfermentable sugars in it, so the mash temp is not on the super high end. It's going to have plenty of residual body and sweetness, so that's not really a concern. Once we get everything mashed in, after the first 20 minutes of conversion is complete in the mash, we pull off about a third of the mash and boil it for around 15 to 20 minutes in a separate pot for that modified decoction and a little extra caramelization on the wort. We then want to fill our boil kettle, and this is the part that may be unique to your system, so I can't really give you a specific number. All I can tell you is that my mash doesn't have a super great efficiency when I load the mash tun up with a bunch of grain, so I have to overfill my boil kettle and then have a very extended boil. I do have to boil for around 3 to 4 hours, which frankly kind of sucks because I'm just waiting there and burning a bunch of gas. But once the boil is complete, I then whirlpool and knock out at 50 degrees, and I pitch twice the amount of yeast that I would normally pitch for an average lager. I also over-oxygenate the wort because it's so dense that not as much oxygen will be in solution, so I make sure to step that up just a little bit. The nuances of brewing higher gravity beers is that you generally need much more yeast, much more oxygen, and it's going to have a longer fermentation. Especially with this lager yeast, the fermentation ended up being around 3.5 weeks long, and then I crashed it and lagered it for another 4 weeks, so the total time in a tank was about 2 months. Now, some people may point out that the IBUs are slightly low for such a residually sweet beer, and this beer did finish at 1022, which is around 5.5 degrees Plato, so it does have quite a bit of sweetness left over in the beer, but really don't want this beer to be perceivably sweet. The roasted malts that are in the beer give it this roasted charred quality that kind of makes up for any lack of bitterness. So I generally lean on the lighter side of bitterness when I'm brewing these higher gravity beers. Another interesting thing about beers that have a higher finishing gravity, when you go to carbonate them, a drop test that I've talked about in the carbonation video on this channel doesn't work quite as well because the CO2 stays in solution much better in a thicker syrupy beer. So even though you put, let's say, 5.3 volumes of CO2 in this beer, it's not going to show up in the glass like that. But I generally prefer a lighter amount of carbonation in these darker beers. So set your keg or prime your sugars to where you hit around 2.2 to 2.3 volumes of CO2, and I think that's perfectly good. Now let's take a peek at the brew day. This is what brewing a 22 degree Tamabe looks like. Pilsner malt, Caramunic Type 1, and Carafa Special 2. This recipe used to have flaked oats in it, but I decided to take that out because I wanted to keep it all barley and not have any other adjuncts in there. And honestly, the body of this beer, once it ferments out, it's still pretty significant without the oats. So that's where I'm at today. I've got everything milled, and let's mash in. All right, so we're pretty much done mashing in. I've got all the grains mixed in with the hot water, so we're gonna be looking to shoot for about 152 to 153. This is just slightly on the lower end of the temp spectrum because there's so much unfermentable sugar in this recipe. So we've got Pilsner malt, Cara Munich Type 1, and Carafa Special 2 in pretty high proportion. So this is a big, syrupy, roasty, chocolatey base wort that we will then boil and reduce and condense into an even more syrupy wort that we will then knock out and ferment and lager for 2 months. And this is nice and thick and dark, and we'll let this rest for about 20 minutes. All right, 20 minutes is up. I've transferred a portion of the mash to my kettle back here, and we are performing the modified decoction. So I'm boiling these grains. It is getting real thick and juicy. It is getting real thick and roasty and syrupy, and this is looking awesome, and it's smelling really great too. So we're gonna boil this for about 15 minutes on the stove, and then we will reintroduce it back into the mash, and it will raise our mash temperature, and we will begin to recirculate, boil off to clarify the wort. All right, we are recirculating this super dark, thick, 22-degree Tamave wort. And let this go for about 20 minutes, and then we will transfer it over to the brew kettle. All right, we are currently sparging, pumping over into the kettle. Oh, look at that nice thick espresso foam. One of the downsides to brewing such a large beer, large in gravity, is that the efficiency of the mash usually is a lot lower. So you have to collect an amount of wort and then significantly reduce it, which means a long boil time. So this boil is probably going to be close to 3 hours, which frankly kind of sucks because you're just sitting up here, but let's take a look at it. It's trying to come up. I need to pat it down with the brew paddle. This is a patented technique that you can only use if you buy my subscription to Tanglefoot Brewing. This is called the pat down. It's only available here for a short amount of time, so log on right now at tanglefootbrewing.com and collect yours before we're sold out. Ah, it didn't work. Got an extra pat down. Woo! This boy's got a lot of protein. A lot of protein. What the am I doing with my life? All right, this is the joys of brewing. I'm holding a camera in my right hand and I'm patting down fucking, all right, this ain't gonna work. Well, that didn't work too well. Now I've got to do the double patented spray it down. So that's the 22-degree Tamave. If you're looking to brew this at home on your system, go to the website, download the PDF. Make sure you tag me if you do brew this beer. I'd love to see if anybody takes the opportunity to make this at home. 2 months. Remember, give it 2 months. It's a big beer. That's all I got. Cheers.